Jake Mitchell wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled out from under the massive power coupling in the station's engineering bay. The alien machinery hummed and sparked around him, a constant reminder that he was very far from home. 3 months working on Kepler Station had taught him that Zelfarian technology was impressive, but poorly maintained. Everything seemed to work, but barely. "Mitchell, report to Engineering Section C immediately," came the voice through his CUM device. Commander Vextar's translator made his words sound cold and mechanical. Urgent repair needed before departure. Jake grabbed his toolkit and headed deeper into the station. The corridors were dimmer than usual, and he noticed several work crews rushing past him with equipment. The emergency evacuation drill they had run yesterday must have found more problems than expected. The whole expedition team had been on edge for weeks as the station's systems continued to fail. Engineering Section C was in the deepest part of the station, near the old mining equipment that hadn't worked in decades. Jake had only been down there once before. The air was thicker here, and the lighting strips flickered constantly. He found the maintenance hatch that Vextar had described and began setting up his equipment. The repair was simple enough. A coolant line had burst, spraying freezing liquid across several control panels. Jake worked quickly, sealing the leak and cleaning the damaged circuits. It was the kind of basic maintenance that should have been done months ago. But the Zelfarians seemed to only fix things after they broke completely. As he worked, Jake heard sounds echoing through the station. Heavy footsteps, machinery being moved, voices calling out in the Zelfarian language. It sounded like organized chaos, but that was normal on Kepler Station. Everything here was always an emergency. Jake finished the repair and tried to contact Vextar on his CUM device. Static. He tried the main communication channel. More static. The interference down in Section C was worse than usual. He packed up his tools and headed for the exit. The heavy blast door was closed. Jake stared at the sealed entrance for a moment, then pressed the control panel. Nothing happened. He tried again, using the emergency override code. The panel flashed red and made an angry beeping sound. He was locked in. "Hey!" Jake shouted, pounding on the thick metal door. "Someone locked the blast door. I'm stuck in Section C." His voice echoed in the empty corridor behind him. He pulled out his CUM device and tried every frequency he knew. Nothing but static and silence. Jake felt the first cold touch of real fear. He forced himself to think clearly. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the evacuation drill was still running. Maybe they were testing the emergency systems. Maybe the door had malfunctioned. He walked back through Section C, looking for another exit. The old mining tunnels went deeper into the station, but they were sealed off years ago. The ventilation shafts were too small for a human to crawl through. There was only one way out, and it was locked. Jake found a maintenance terminal and managed to access the station's basic systems. What he saw made his blood turn cold. All personnel transport ships had launched 20 minutes ago. The station's life support was running on emergency power. External communications were offline. The automated systems were counting down to complete shutdown in 72 hours. Jake stared at the screen, reading the information over and over. It didn't make sense. The expedition wasn't supposed to leave for another week. And why would they lock him in Section C? Then he understood. They had left him here to die. Jake's legs gave out, and he sat down hard on the metal floor. The Zelfarians had calculated that the failing station couldn't support everyone on the journey back to civilized space. Someone had to be left behind. The human engineer, working alone in the deepest part of the station, was the obvious choice. He thought about Vextar's cold voice ordering him to Section C, the urgent repair that could have waited. The convenient communication failure. They had planned this. Jake sat in the flickering light for a long time, feeling sorry for himself. Then he got angry. Then he got to work. He accessed every system he could reach from the maintenance terminal. The station was in worse shape than he had thought. The main power generator was operating at only 23% efficiency. The atmospheric processors were running on backup systems that were older than his grandfather. The water recycling system was held together with emergency patches and hope, but it was still working. Barely. Jake pulled up the station blueprints on the terminal. Kepler Station was huge, much bigger than the small section the expedition had been using. Most of it had been abandoned for decades when the mining operation shut down. The Zeltharians had only maintained the basic life support for their research areas. He had 3 days of emergency food in his toolkit. The water systems might last a week if he was careful. The air recycling could probably run for a month before. It failed completely, unless he could fix it. Jake looked around the engineering section with new eyes. He wasn't just trapped here. He was surrounded by tools, spare parts, and machinery that the Zeltharians didn't understand, but he might. He was a structural engineer from Earth, trained to build things that lasted and fix things that broke. The Zeltharians had left him, here to die on their broken-down station. Maybe it was time to show them what a human engineer could really do. Jake woke up on the cold metal floor of Engineering Section C with a crick in his neck and a growling stomach. He had fallen asleep over the maintenance terminal after spending most of the night reading system reports. The numbers were not encouraging. 47 hours until complete system shutdown. He opened one of his 3 emergency food packets and ate slowly, making it last. Water was more important than food, and the recycling systems were barely working. Jake had maybe 6 days before he died of thirst. Assuming the air didn't run out first. Time to explore. Jake had spent 3 months on Kepler Station, but only in the small research section where the expedition had been working. The rest of the massive structure was supposed to be abandoned and sealed off. But if he was going to survive, he needed to know what resources were available. The maintenance tunnels connected everything. Jake followed them away from Section C, using his handheld light to navigate the dark passages. The station was much bigger than he had realized. Corridor after corridor stretched into the darkness, most of them showing signs of age and neglect. Something was strange about the construction. Jake stopped at a junction where 4 tunnels met and examined the walls closely. The metal work was incredible. The joints were seamless, the angles were perfect, and the structural design was more advanced than anything he had seen before. This wasn't Zeltharian construction. This was something much older and far more sophisticated. He found a working terminal in an abandoned section and accessed the station's historical records. What he read made him whistle in amazement. Kepler Station had been built by the ancients over 800 years ago. The Zeltharians had found it drifting empty in space about 50 years ago and decided to use it as a mining base. They had never figured out how most of the original systems worked, so they just installed their own equipment inside the ancient structure. No wonder everything was falling apart. Jake spent the next several hours exploring, mapping each section in his head. The station was enormous. Most of it was empty, but the basic framework was still solid. The ancients had built things to last forever. In what used to be the main power center, Jake found something that made his engineer's heart race. The original ancient power systems were still there, buried under decades of Zeltharian modifications. The aliens had installed their own generators without understanding that they were connecting to something much more powerful. Jake studied the setup carefully. The Zeltharians had done everything wrong. They had bypassed the main power distribution network and ran cables directly to their equipment. They had installed primitive regulators that were actually limiting power flow. They had blocked cooling vents and rerouted power through systems that weren't designed to handle it. It was like finding someone using a nuclear reactor to power a toaster. Jake began making notes on his cum device, sketching out how the systems should actually work. The power fluctuations that plagued the station weren't mysterious at all. They were caused by the conflict between the ancient systems trying to regulate power properly and the Zalfarian equipment fighting against that. Regulation. He started with small changes. Using tools from the maintenance lockers, Jake disconnected some of the Zalfarian modifications and let the ancient systems work the way they were designed to. Almost immediately, the lights in that section became brighter and steadier. The atmospheric processors were next. Jake found the original ancient air recycling equipment in a sealed chamber that the Zalfarians had apparently never discovered. It was powered down but intact. The aliens had been using primitive backup systems for 50 years while sitting. Next to technology, they could have supplied fresh air for 1 million people. Getting the ancient systems online was like solving a 3-dimensional puzzle. Everything connected to everything else in ways that weren't obvious until Jake started tracing the actual power and data flows. The Zalfarians had been treating each system as separate, but the ancients had designed everything to work together as one massive, integrated machine. Jake's first real breakthrough came when he managed to bring one of the ancient atmospheric processors online. The improvement was immediate. The air in that section became cleaner and fresher within minutes. The system was so efficient that it was actually producing more breathable air than it was consuming. With better air to breathe, Jake felt more confident about his chances. He moved on to the water systems. Here, the Zalfarian incompetence was almost criminal. They had been using maybe 10% of the station's water recycling capacity. The ancient systems could process any liquid into pure water, but the Zalfarians had never activated the main recycling plants. They had been trucking in fresh water for 50 years. Jake spent a full day working on the water systems, carefully bringing the ancient equipment back online piece by piece. By the end of the day, he had clean, unlimited water flowing through that section of the station. The food situation was harder. The emergency rations in his toolkit were running low, and he hadn't found any food storage areas yet. But he had found something interesting in the old research files. The ancients had apparently grown their own food using some kind of advanced hydroponic systems. Jake found the growing chambers on his 3rd day of exploration. They were dark and cold, but the equipment was still there. Banks of growing beds, nutrient dispensers, and what looked like advanced lighting systems. All of it powered down, but not damaged. The instruction manuals were in ancient script, but the system diagrams were clear enough. Jake had helped his neighbor build a greenhouse back on Earth. The basic principles were the same. Even if the technology was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. It took him 2 days to get the first growing chamber operational. When the lights came on and the nutrient system started flowing, Jake felt a surge of pride. He might actually survive this. By the end of his first week alone, Jake had air, water, and the beginnings of a food supply. The station's emergency countdown had stopped at 18 hours when he brought the main ancient systems online. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was starting to understand what the Zalfarians had been too stupid to see. Kepler Station wasn't a broken-down mining facility. It was a masterpiece. Jake stood in the main engineering bay, looking at the wall of displays that showed every system on Kepler Station. 2 weeks ago, most of these screens had been dark or flashing red with warnings. Now they glowed a steady green, showing power, flows, and system status that would have amazed the Zalfarians. But Jake wasn't satisfied with just getting things working. His engineer's mind was already seeing ways to make everything better. The mining equipment in the lower levels had caught his attention. The Zalfarians had been using it to extract basic metals and minerals, but they were doing it all wrong. Jake had spent 3 days studying the ancient mining systems, and what he found was incredible. The equipment wasn't just designed to dig materials out of asteroids. It was designed to sort, refine, and process everything automatically. The Zeltharians had been running the most sophisticated mining operation in the galaxy, like a bunch of people with shovels. Jake started by cleaning and calibrating the sorting mechanisms. The ancient systems could separate materials down to the atomic level, but 50 years of poor maintenance had left the sensors dirty and misaligned. Once he got them working properly, the difference was amazing. Where the Zeltharians had been pulling out raw chunks of mixed metals, the ancient systems separated everything into pure elements: iron, copper, gold, platinum, and dozens of rare minerals that Jake didn't even recognize, all sorted automatically and stored in different containers. But that was just the beginning. Jake discovered that the ancient mining systems could do more than just sort materials. They could actually combine elements to create new alloys and compounds. The Zeltharians had been throwing away the most valuable part of their operation because they didn't understand what they had. Working with the ancient manufacturing systems was like being given access to the most advanced laboratory in the universe. Jake could design a new metal alloy on the computer, and the systems would create it within hours. He started experimenting, combining human engineering knowledge with ancient technology. The results were incredible. Jake created structural materials that were stronger than anything humans had ever developed. He made flexible cables that could carry more power than the heaviest Earth conductors. He even figured out how to manufacture complex electronic components using the ancient fabrication systems. With unlimited materials and manufacturing capability, Jake began rebuilding entire sections of the station. But he wasn't just restoring them to their original condition. He was improving them. The power distribution network was his first major project. The ancient design was already far ahead of human technology, but Jake could see ways to make it even better. He added redundant pathways and improved the control systems using principles he had learned in engineering school. The result was a power grid that was more efficient and more reliable than anything the ancients had originally built. Power flowed smoothly to every system without waste or fluctuation. Jake had turned Kepler Station into the most energy-efficient structure he had ever seen. The atmospheric systems were next. Jake didn't just restore the ancient air processors. He enhanced them. Using his understanding of fluid dynamics and airflow, he redesigned the circulation patterns throughout the station. Fresh air reached every corner, and the recycling was so efficient that the station was actually producing more oxygen than it consumed. Jake was having fun. For the first time since being abandoned on the station, he was genuinely enjoying himself. Every day brought new challenges and new discoveries. The ancient technology was like an endless puzzle, and Jake was good at puzzles. The computer systems were the biggest challenge. The Zeltharians had never been able to interface properly with the ancient computers, so they had just ignored them and used their own primitive equipment. Jake approached the problem differently. Instead of trying to make the ancient computers work like human computers, Jake learned to work the way the ancient computers wanted to work. It took weeks of trial and error, but eventually he began to understand their logic. The ancient computers weren't just calculating machines. They were designed to learn and adapt. Once Jake figured out how to communicate with them properly, they began teaching themselves about human engineering principles. Soon, the computers were suggesting improvements to his designs and helping him optimize systems throughout the station. Working with the ancient computers was like having a team of genius engineers helping him. They could run simulations, test designs faster than Jake could even think of them. Together, they began creating improvements that neither humans nor ancients had ever imagined. The station's defensive systems had been offline for decades, but Jake got them working again. The ancient weapons were incredibly advanced, but Jake added his own improvements. He designed better targeting systems and more efficient power management. The weapons that came online could have held off an entire fleet, but the most satisfying project was the mining operation itself. Jake completely redesigned the workflow, combining ancient technology with human efficiency principles. Where the Zelfarians had been producing maybe 1,000 tons of mixed materials per month, Jake's improved systems were producing 10,000 tons of pure, refined materials per week. The station wasn't just functional anymore. It was thriving. Jake set up automated systems to handle routine maintenance and production. The ancient computers managed everything, while Jake focused on new projects. Robot workers that he had built using ancient manufacturing systems moved through the station, making repairs and improvements according to his designs. 3 months after being abandoned to die, Jake Mitchell had transformed Kepler Station into something that exceeded even the original ancient specifications. The station was producing more power, more materials, and more advanced technology than any facility in known space. And Jake was just getting started. He had plans for expanded manufacturing facilities, improved defensive systems, and research laboratories that could push the boundaries of science. The station that the Zelfarians had been ready to abandon was becoming the most valuable piece of real estate in the galaxy. Jake smiled as he watched his latest batch of robot workers rolling out to start construction on a new section of the station. The Zelfarians had left him here to die on their broken mining facility. Instead, he had built himself a technological empire. 6 months after being left to die, Jake Mitchell stood on the command deck of Kepler Station and watched his latest creation take its first steps. The robot was beautiful in its simplicity, a perfect blend of ancient technology and human engineering. It moved with smooth precision, its sensors constantly scanning for maintenance tasks throughout the station. Jake had built 50 of these repair drones over the past month. Each one was equipped with tools that could handle any maintenance problem. On the station, they worked constantly, never tired, never complained, and never made the stupid mistakes that had plagued Zelfarian maintenance crews. The drones were just one of Jake's recent innovations. The station was now operating so far beyond its original specifications that even the ancient computers seemed surprised by their own performance. Jake had pushed every system to new levels of efficiency, then pushed them even further. The main manufacturing center was his greatest achievement. Jake had expanded it into 3 full levels of the station, each one dedicated to different types of production. The first level handled basic materials and components. The second level assembled complex machinery and electronics. The third level was Jake's research laboratory, where he created entirely new technologies, working with the ancient computers. Jake had developed manufacturing techniques that neither humans nor ancients had ever imagined. He could now create materials at the atomic level, building exactly what he needed with no waste. The station was producing everything from advanced electronics to exotic metals that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. But what excited Jake most was his breakthrough with energy systems. The ancient power generators had been impressive, but Jake had figured out how to make them even better. By combining human understanding of nuclear physics with ancient energy manipulation technology, he had created power systems that were almost impossibly efficient. The station was now producing more energy than it could possibly use. Jake had started building energy storage systems, but even those were filling up faster than he could expand them. He was seriously considering building transmission systems to sell excess power to nearby colonies. The defensive systems had been Jake's biggest surprise. When he first brought the ancient weapons online, he thought they were impressive but outdated. Then he started improving them with human military engineering principles, and the results were incredible. The weapon arrays that now protected Kepler Station were beyond anything in current galactic military technology. Jake had improved the targeting systems using human ballistics calculations. He had enhanced the power systems using his new energy technologies. He had even added new weapon types based on human weapons design. The station could now defend itself against entire fleets. Jake had run simulations with the ancient computers, and the results were clear. Any military force in known space would be destroyed before they could get close enough to threaten the station. But Jake wasn't planning to fight anyone. He was too busy building. The agricultural systems had been his most personally satisfying project. The ancient growing chambers had been impressive, but Jake had expanded them throughout an entire section of the station. Using hydroponic techniques he remembered from Earth, combined with ancient biological enhancement technology, Jake was now growing food that was more nutritious and flavorful than anything he had ever eaten. The station was producing enough food to feed thousands of people. Jake had started preserving and storing the surplus, partly because he was an engineer who liked being prepared, and partly because he was getting bored eating the same vegetables every day. Jake's newest project was something that would have seemed impossible when he first arrived on the station. He was building a fleet of automated mining ships. Using ancient technology as a foundation and human industrial engineering as a guide, Jake was creating vessels that could travel to nearby asteroid fields and bring back materials without any crew at all. The first ship was nearly complete. It was sleek and efficient, designed to operate independently for months at a time. The ancient computers would control its navigation and mining operations, while Jake's improvements would ensure it could extract and process materials more efficiently than any manned operation. Jake estimated that a fleet of 10 such ships could supply materials for a dozen colonies. He was already designing the second ship, incorporating lessons learned from building the first. The station's computer systems had evolved far beyond their original programming. Working with Jake for months, the ancient computers had learned human engineering principles and begun applying them independently. They were now suggesting improvements to station systems that Jake hadn't even considered. Sometimes, Jake would wake up to find that the computers had implemented new efficiency improvements overnight. The station was essentially upgrading itself, guided by a combination of ancient logic and human practical thinking. Jake had also solved the station's resource sustainability problem completely. The ancients had originally designed Kepler Station to be self-sufficient, but the Zeltharians had never figured out how to activate the closed-loop systems. Under Jake's management, the station was now producing everything it needed and more. Water was recycled so efficiently that the station was actually building up reserves. Air was constantly renewed and purified by systems that extracted oxygen from raw materials. Food production was expanding faster than Jake could eat it. Energy production far exceeded consumption. Most importantly, the station was now producing rare materials and advanced technologies that were incredibly valuable. Jake's improved mining and manufacturing systems were creating substances that research labs throughout the galaxy would pay enormous amounts to study. Jake sat in his command chair and looked at the displays showing station operations. Every system was running perfectly. Production was ahead of schedule. The repair drones were maintaining everything flawlessly. The defensive systems stood ready to protect his work. Kepler Station, which had been marked for demolition when he arrived, was now worth more than most planetary colonies. It was the most advanced facility in known space, producing resources and technologies that didn't exist anywhere else. And Jake was just getting started. He had plans for expansion that would make the current station look small. He had designs for new technologies that would revolutionize space industry. He had ideas that would change how the galaxy thought about engineering. The Zeltharians had left him here to die on a worthless piece of space junk. Instead, Jake Mitchell had built the future. 18 months after being abandoned on Kepler Station, Jake Mitchell was having the best day of his engineering career. His newest automated mining ship had just returned from the asteroid belt with a cargo hold full of rare platinum compounds. The manufacturing systems were producing components for his next big project, and the ancient computers had suggested 3 new efficiency improvements while he slept. Jake was in the middle of calibrating a new sensor array when his long-range detection systems picked up something unusual. Ships were approaching Kepler Station. A lot of ships. Jake pulled up the sensor displays and studied the incoming fleet. 12 vessels, moving in formation, broadcasting identification codes that made him smile. It was a Galactic Council salvage operation, complete with military escort and heavy cargo haulers. They were coming to scrap his station. Jake activated the communication systems and opened a channel to the lead ship. After 18 months of talking only to computers, he was looking forward to some human conversation. Incoming salvage fleet. This is Kepler Station operations, Jake said into his microphone. Please identify yourselves and state your business. Response came back after a long pause, and Jake could hear the confusion in the voice. Kepler Station. This is Captain Lisa Carter of the Earth Defense Force vessel Atlantic. We're here for salvage operations on an abandoned mining facility. Please identify yourself. This is Jake Mitchell, Chief Engineer of Kepler Station, Jake replied cheerfully. I'm afraid there's been some confusion. This facility is not abandoned and is definitely not ready for salvage. Would you like to speak with the station commander? Another long pause. Mr. Mitchell, our records show that Kepler Station was evacuated 18 months ago due to total system failure. Are you saying the station is operational? Jake looked around his command center with its wall of green status lights and smoothly humming systems. Oh yes, Captain Carter. Very operational. In fact, we're running at about 400% of original design capacity. Would you like me to transmit our current production reports? The silence that followed was so long that Jake started to wonder if his communication system had failed. Finally, Captain Carter's voice came back, sounding stunned. Mr. Mitchell, permission to come aboard. We need to assess the situation. Permission granted, Captain. I'll have docking bay 7 prepared for your shuttle. Fair warning, though, you might want to bring some engineers. I've got about 300 improvements to show you, and some of them are pretty exciting. An hour later, Jake stood in docking bay 7, watching a shuttle from the Earth Defense Force settle onto the landing pad. The bay was spotless, maintained by his repair drones and lit by efficient, ancient lighting systems that had been upgraded with human engineering principles. Captain Carter stepped out of the shuttle, followed by 2 other humans and a Zeltharian officer. Jake recognized the alien immediately. It was Commander Vextar, the same officer who had ordered him to Engineering Section C 18 months ago. Captain Carter was a tall woman with short brown hair and the kind of practical expression that Jake associated with good engineers. She looked around the docking bay with obvious amazement. Mr. Mitchell, she said, extending her hand. I'm Captain Lisa Carter. This is Lieutenant Ryan Cooper, our chief engineer, and Dr. Amy Walsh, our xenotechnology specialist. And I believe you know Commander Vextar. Jake shook hands with the humans and nodded politely to Vextar, who was staring at the docking bay like he had never seen it before. Which, Jake realized, he probably hadn't. This bay had been completely rebuilt. Welcome to Kepler Station, Jake said. I hope you brought comfortable shoes. We've got a lot of ground to cover. The tour took 6 hours. Jake led them through the manufacturing centers, the improved power systems, the expanded agricultural sections, and the defensive installations. At each stop, Lieutenant Cooper asked increasingly technical questions, while Dr. Walsh took detailed scans of everything. With her equipment, Captain Carter remained mostly quiet, but Jake could see her making mental calculations as they walked. She was figuring out exactly how valuable everything she was seeing actually was. Commander Vextar said nothing at all. In the main engineering center, Jake pulled up the station's current performance statistics on the main display. Current power. Output is running at 412% of original ancient design specifications, he explained. Material production is up by roughly 3,000% compared to previous Zelfarian operations. We're completely self-sufficient for food, water, air, and energy, with significant surplus in all categories. Lieutenant Cooper stared at the numbers. This is impossible. How did you achieve these efficiency levels? Jake smiled. Turns out, the Zelfarians were doing everything wrong. The ancient systems were designed to work together as an integrated whole, but they were treating each system separately. Once I figured out how everything was supposed to connect, the improvements were obvious. Obvious, Dr. Walsh repeated faintly. You call this obvious? Well, maybe not obvious to everyone, Jake admitted. But the ancient computers helped a lot once I taught them human engineering principles. They're really quite clever. Captain. Carter finally spoke. Mr. Mitchell, what are your intentions regarding the station? Jake looked around the engineering center with its perfectly maintained equipment and smoothly running systems. I was kind of hoping to keep working here, actually. I've got plans for some major expansions, and I'm in the middle of designing a new class of automated cargo ships. Plus, someone needs to train the replacement crew, and that's going to take months. Replacement crew? Vextar spoke for the first time since coming aboard. Oh yes, Jake said. This station is way too valuable to operate with just one person. I figure you'll need at least 50 people to run it properly. Maybe 100 if you want to expand operations. I've prepared a comprehensive training manual. It's only about 200 pages, but most of that is safety procedures. Captain Carter and her team exchanged glances. Jake could practically see them trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Mr. Mitchell, Captain Carter said carefully, do you understand what you've accomplished here? Jake shrugged. I fixed some broken systems and made a few improvements. Nothing too complicated. Nothing too complicated, Lieutenant Cooper muttered. He's built the most advanced facility in known space and calls it nothing too complicated. 3 days later, Jake stood in his command center and watched the salvage fleet transform into a protection fleet. Word had spread quickly through galactic communication networks. Kepler Station was no longer abandoned wreck. It was the most valuable piece of real estate in the sector. Captain Carter had requested emergency reinforcements to guard the station, while the Galactic Council figured out what to do. Jake had offered to upgrade their ship's defensive systems while they waited, and was having fun working with human technology again. Commander Vextar had left with the first departing ship, but not before Jake handed him a detailed, technical report explaining exactly what had gone wrong with the original Zelfarian operations. Jake thought it might be useful for their other facilities. The best part was the message Jake had received that morning. 36 engineering teams from across human space had requested permission to visit Kepler Station to study his improvements. Universities were offering him research positions. Corporations were trying to hire him. Jake looked at his plans for the new expansion projects and smiled. The Zelfarians had left him here to die on their broken-down mining station. Instead, Jake Mitchell had become the most famous engineer in the galaxy.